A veterinary behaviorist once told me something I've never forgotten. 9 out of 10 cat owners who come to see me believe their cat is perfectly fine. She said this while replaying footage from a home security camera. On the screen was an orange tabby named Dodo. About 40 minutes after the owner had left, the cat was still curled up on the mat by the front door. It hadn't moved. It just kept staring at the entrance. But when the owner came home, they saw something completely different. Their cat was lying on the couch, half asleep. It looked up for a second, then closed its eyes and went back to resting. The owner never saw those 40 minutes at the door. And that's the important part. What you think is nothing is wrong, and what a camera actually records, are often two very different stories. Here's something many people don't realize. A cat's stress response usually doesn't begin when you close the front door. It often begins much earlier, the moment you pick up your keys. Researchers at Utrecht University in the Netherlands, who studied the behavior of domestic cats, found that many cats showed signs of stress during the routines that happened before their owners even left. Putting on shoes, picking up a bag, grabbing a set of keys. These small, ordinary actions were often enough to trigger an increase in heart rate and pupil size. This is a classic example of conditioned learning. The routine you repeat every morning has already become a signal in your cat's brain. It has learned what those actions usually mean. You're about to leave. There's another idea that's been shared in cat and dog training circles for years. Some trainers suggest pretending to leave the house. Pick up your keys, put on your shoes, then don't actually go anywhere. The goal is to make those departure cues less meaningful over time. It sounds reasonable. But the evidence isn't as straightforward as many people assume. A review from Spain, examining the mechanisms behind separation-related anxiety in companion animals, found that this kind of desensitization helped some cats. But for others, it actually increased their anxiety. Because the real problem was never the keys, or the shoes, or the sound of the front door. The real problem was uncertainty. The cat wasn't worried about how you left. It was worried about something much more important. Are you coming back? And until that question feels predictable, the stress often begins long before the door ever closes. If you place a camera in your home and watch what happens during the first 10 minutes after you leave, you'll often notice a surprisingly consistent pattern. The exact timing varies from cat to cat, but the sequence is often very similar. Around 2.5 to 3 minutes after the owner leaves, many cats begin to vocalize. Some let out quiet, low-frequency meows. Others start pacing through the house. By the 5 or 6 minute mark, cats with a stronger tendency toward anxiety may begin scratching at the door, or biting curtains near the entrance. At first glance, these behaviors seem like the most obvious signs of distress, but they aren't the part researchers pay the closest attention to. What matters even more is what happens next. Eventually, the meowing begins to fade. The scratching stops. The pacing slows down. If you looked at the camera at that moment, you might think your cat had finally relaxed. Maybe it's sitting quietly on the windowsill. Maybe it's lying down on the couch. Everything appears calm. But appearances can be misleading. Because the body is telling a different story. Using remote monitoring equipment, researchers found that during this seemingly peaceful period, many cats still maintained an elevated heart rate. Their breathing also remained above normal resting levels. In other words, the stress hadn't disappeared. It had simply changed its form. Instead of expressing distress in loud, visible ways, the cat had shifted into a quieter, more internal state of stress. Silence in this case wasn't the same as relaxation. It was simply a less obvious way of coping. Researchers also noticed something else. This quiet period wasn't a smooth, steady recovery. Stress didn't gradually fade away in a straight line. Instead, it came in waves. Roughly every 20 minutes or so, many cats showed another small rise in stress-related behavior. They might suddenly start pacing again, freeze and stare toward a particular spot, or begin grooming themselves far more than usual. That last behavior is especially easy for owners to misunderstand. Watching a cat groom itself often looks completely normal. It can even seem comforting, almost as if the cat is calming itself down. But excessive grooming tells a very different story. In feline behavioral medicine, grooming to the point of hair loss, or licking until the skin becomes red and irritated, is recognized as a classic displacement behavior. In other words, it's one of the ways chronic stress can reveal itself, not through noise, not through destruction, but through repetitive behaviors that quietly replace the emotion the cat has no other way to express. A study from Finland compared two groups of cats. One group showed what researchers described as a secure attachment to their owners. The other showed clear signs of separation-related anxiety. What happened after the owners left was strikingly different. Cats in the first group spent most of their time doing two things: resting and quietly watching their surroundings. According to the study, these activities accounted for well over 60% of their time alone. This wasn't emotional shutdown, and it wasn't indifference. It was something much simpler. The cat appeared to expect that its owner would come back. So, it waited. Calmly. The researchers also looked for other explanations: breed, age, sex. But none of these showed a meaningful difference between the two groups. What separated them wasn't who the cats were. It was what they had learned to expect. More specifically, whether returning home had become a predictable part of the owner's routine. And that expectation isn't something a cat is born with. It's something that's shaped little by little. Through everyday experience, many owners assume that scratching furniture or leaving marks on the bed means their cat is bored or trying to get revenge, but long-term observational studies suggest something different. Researchers found that one of the strongest factors influencing whether a cat develops chronic separation-related problems isn't how long you spend saying goodbye before you leave. It's how you react after you come home. Imagine walking through the door and finding scratches on the sofa, or noticing an unpleasant smell somewhere in the house. If your response is obvious frustration, raising your voice, showing prolonged anger, expressing negative emotion for an extended period, cats in these situations were more likely to develop persistent separation-related behavioral problems over time. There's an important reason for this. Cats don't understand time the way humans do. They can't connect something they did several hours ago with your reaction now. They simply don't have that kind of long-term cause and effect reasoning, so they don't learn. The sofa was scratched, and that's why my owner is upset. Instead, they learn something much more immediate. My owner came home, and then something unpleasant happened. Over time, the owner's return itself can begin to predict stress. And once that happens, leaving and returning are no longer separate experiences. In the cat's mind, they've become linked together. One begins to make the other feel uncertain. And a cat that's anxious when you come home is often even more anxious when you leave, because both moments now carry the same emotional weight. Faced with a cat that struggles to be alone, many people have the same first thought. Maybe my cat just needs another cat. It sounds logical, but observations from multiple studies of multi-cat households tell a different story. Cats living with other cats don't consistently show fewer signs of separation-related anxiety after their owners leave. In some homes, the anxious behaviors are actually more noticeable. The reason isn't especially complicated. Separation anxiety isn't simply about being alone. It's about the absence of one particular individual. Bringing another cat into the home may solve the problem of having no companion nearby, but it doesn't replace the specific person the anxious cat has formed an attachment to, and for that reason, it often doesn't solve the problem owners were hoping to fix. Products like pheromone diffusers, calming treats, or even videos made specifically for cats are all designed to help during the hours when the owner is away. But according to what we know today, the most important opportunity for intervention doesn't happen while you're gone. It happens during the many hours you're still at home. The approach that has been repeatedly supported by research is gradual desensitization. Not leaving for 4 or 5 hours all at once, but starting with something much smaller. Walk to the front door, pause for a moment, then come back, touch the doorknob, come back again. Step outside for a few seconds, then return. At first, it can feel almost absurd. You may even wonder, can this really count as training? But that's exactly what's happening. Each repetition gives the cat's nervous system another chance to experience the complete sequence. You leave, and then you come back, again and again. Only after enough repetitions does the cat's prediction system begin to adjust. Many animal behaviorists have observed a similar turning point. Once a cat can comfortably remain alone for around 30 minutes without showing clear signs of stress, extending that time to several hours often becomes much easier than owners expect. 30 minutes isn't a magical number. For cats with more severe separation-related anxiety, veterinary behavior clinics may combine behavior training with anti-anxiety medication. Research has shown that this combined approach is often more effective than behavior training alone. The purpose of medication isn't to make a cat sleepy or emotionally numb. It's to reduce the level of anxiety enough for the brain to begin forming new expectations that are no longer built around fear. So, the next time you come home and find your cat sitting quietly on the windowsill, don't assume that silence tells the whole story. The more important question isn't whether your cat made a mess, or whether it cried while you were gone. The real question is this: during the time you were away, did your cat truly believe that you were coming back? Because sometimes, the cats that appear to be coping the best, are the ones still waiting for a reason to feel safe.